At the family gathering, my father asked with a puzzled look, "Honey, why did you take an Uber? Did something happen to the car I gave you for your birthday?" Before I could answer, my husband chimed in with a grin. "That car belongs to my mother now. She needed it more." My father fell silent for a moment, and what he did next filled me with a profound sense of pride. That afternoon, the main residence of the Harrison family was enveloped in a warm yet imposing atmosphere. The grand, modern architecture mansion buzzed with the aroma of delicious food wafting from the central hall and the laughter of relatives. It was the monthly family gathering, an event the relatives always looked forward to. In the spacious gravel courtyard, a fleet of luxury cars was parked in perfect order. From the latest European sedans to large SUVs costing hundreds of thousands of dollars, they all gleamed, reflecting the sun's rays that filtered through the dark clouds that had suddenly covered the clear sky. Inside, uncles, aunts, and cousins enjoyed a buffet catered by the city's finest service. However, amidst all this opulence, a chair at the main table, right next to Ryan Anderson, was empty. Ryan, comfortably seated in his carved teak chair, showed no sign of waiting for his wife, who had yet to arrive. On the contrary, he was completely engrossed in enjoying a Wagyu steak on his plate. Occasionally, he would let out a loud laugh at a joke from his cousin, who, dressed in a designer silk shirt and a flashy gold watch, it was trying hard to fit in with his wife's family, a family of tycoons in their own right. Ryan always felt he had to prove he deserved to be there, even though everyone in that room knew his management position at the company was a gift from his father-in-law, the chairman, James Harrison. His overly confident and somewhat arrogant attitude often made some relatives uncomfortable, but they remained silent out of respect for Mr. Harrison, known for his patience and wisdom. Outside the high walls of the estate, a dark blue sedan from a ride-sharing service pulled up slowly. A light drizzle was beginning to fall, dampening the hot asphalt. The car door opened, and out stepped Emily. She was beautiful but looked a bit overwhelmed. The car's card reader wasn't working, so she had to rummage through her purse to pay the fare in cash. She then hurried out, covering her head with her handbag to prevent her pastel-toned dress from getting soaked. There was no personal chauffeur to open the door for her, no umbrella to greet her. Emily ran across the wide courtyard toward the main entrance, passing by her family's luxurious cars. When she reached the imposing front door, she was slightly out of breath. She adjusted her clothes, brushed the raindrops from her shoulders, and after taking a deep breath to compose herself, she entered the lion's den filled with inquisitive stares. A brief silence fell over the central hall as Emily entered. Before the murmur of conversations resumed, albeit noticeably lower, all eyes were on her. Emily's appearance was simple yet elegant, a stark contrast to the luxury surrounding her. Her face showed fatigue. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed her exhaustion, though she tried to hide it with a faint smile. She approached her father, Chairman Harrison, who presided over the table as the family patriarch. Mr. Harrison observed his daughter with a sharp but loving gaze. He noticed her shoes were slightly stained by the rain, and the hem of her dress was damp. His paternal instinct immediately detected the troubles his daughter had been trying to hide. Mr. Harrison slowly put down his spoon, and the delicate sound it made seemed to resonate with particular force in the ears of everyone present. He looked at Emily, who had just respectfully kissed his cheek, then shifted his gaze to Ryan, who was still chewing his food with relish, not having bothered to stand up or pull out the chair for his wife. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat gently, and that was enough for the conversation at the table to cease completely. With his calm yet commanding baritone voice, he asked a question, a simple question that would change his son-in-law's destiny forever. He asked why Emily had arrived late and why she looked drenched, as if she had come by public transport, especially when he had just given her a very special birthday gift for her comfort. Mr. Harrison inquired with feigned curiosity about the whereabouts of the brand-new Mercedes-Benz S-Class he had sent her the previous week. Had it perhaps broken down, forcing Emily to take a cab in the bad weather? Emily remained silent. Her lips trembled slightly. She hadn't yet found the right words to cover for her husband's behavior, as she didn't want to embarrass him in front of the whole family. Emily was a dutiful wife. She always tried to protect her husband's reputation, even though her heart was often broken. However, before a single word could leave Emily's mouth, Ryan interrupted the conversation with his mouth half full. With a very relaxed attitude and no trace of guilt, Ryan answered his father-in-law's question. He said loudly that the Mercedes-Benz S-Class was now in the hands of his mother, Karen Anderson. Ryan explained, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world, that his mother needed a large, luxurious car so as not to be looked down upon by her friends at the country club. He added an argument that made the blood of those who heard it boil, that Emily, who only went to the office and dressed simply, should live modestly, and that using an Uber was more practical and convenient since she didn't have to look for parking. The room grew even quieter than before. The uncles and aunts looked at each other in disbelief. They knew the car was a personal gift from Mr. Harrison to his only daughter, Emily, not for his son-in-law's famously vain mother. Ryan's words were not only disrespectful, but showed a total lack of consideration for his wife and a lack of awareness of his place before the person who had given the gift. Emily lowered her head, holding back extreme embarrassment. She wasn't ashamed of arriving in a cab, but of her husband so proudly displaying his foolishness in front of her own father. She clutched the hem of her dress, wishing the floor would open up and swallow her. Her heart ached to hear her husband prioritize his mother's image over his wife's comfort. However, Mr. Harrison's reaction was completely unexpected by Ryan. Emily's father didn't slam the table, didn't shout, didn't even flush with anger. Mr. Harrison was silent for a moment, observing his son-in-law as if examining a strange insect. Then, a faint smile appeared on his lips, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He nodded slowly, as if he understood the twisted logic Ryan had just laid out. In a neutral tone, Mr. Harrison said that he now understood Mrs. Anderson was using the car and that he appreciated Ryan's honesty. Ryan, misinterpreting his father-in-law's reaction as a sign of approval, or at least the helplessness of an old man before the younger generation, smiled smugly. He felt victorious, as if he had successfully managed his wife's family assets without any resistance. Under the silk-covered table, Mr. Harrison's hand moved slowly to pull his smartphone from his pocket. Without even looking at the screen, his fingers opened a family messaging app and typed a brief command to his company's security and operations team. Not many words were needed. A single sentence was enough to activate the asset recovery protocol. The message was sent instantly, unleashing a destructive storm upon Ryan and his mother. Mr. Harrison put his smartphone away, lifted his coffee cup, and took a sip with delight, as if he had just signed a very lucrative business deal. His eyes gently rested on Emily, sending her a silent signal that everything would be all right, that her father had the situation under control. Ryan, oblivious to everything, continued to eat greedily, unaware that the sword of Damocles was hanging over his head, ready to cut his arrogance down at the roots. Meanwhile, a contrasting scene was unfolding in another part of the city at a luxury shopping mall, a meeting point for the capital's high society. Not even the cloudy sky could curb Karen Anderson's desire to show off her new toy. In the valet area of the majestic main lobby, a gleaming black Mercedes-Benz S-Class was parked, deliberately a bit crooked for everyone to see. Mrs. Anderson stood beside the car with her chin held high. She was dressed from head to toe in clashing colors, in a clumsy attempt to display luxury brand logos. A faux crocodile skin handbag hung from her arm, and her fingers were laden with excessively shiny gold rings. Around her, 5 of her friends from the country club watched with varied expressions, some with admiration, some with envy, and some who, knowing the modest origins of Karen's family, were secretly laughing. But today, the stage belonged to Karen. She purposefully raised her voice to announce that this large, magnificent car was a special gift from her dear son, Ryan. She boasted that Ryan's business was booming, so much so that he could buy her this car, worth nearly $150,000 in cash with no financing. She patted the car's hood as if patting her son on the back, bragging about the comfortable, heated and ventilated seats and the state-of-the-art sound system. She didn't mention Emily's name at all, as if her daughter-in-law had contributed nothing to her son's success. Her friends showered her with feigned compliments, which inflated Karen's ego even more. They praised what a good son Ryan was and how lucky Karen was to have such a successful and respectful child. Karen soaked up all the flattery like a sponge, feeling on top of the world. She even allowed herself to throw a jab at one of her friends who had arrived in an older sedan, suggesting it was time to upgrade for safety and comfort. Satisfied after nearly half an hour of showing off, Karen finally decided to end the gathering. She said her goodbyes with as much elegance as she could muster, saying she had to go to her regular beauty salon for a facial. Karen pressed the button on the handle to open the car door and slid into the cool, new leather-scented interior. She sat in the driver's seat, straightening her back to appear taller, and waved once more to her friends, who were still on the curb, watching her departure. With complete confidence, Karen pushed the start button, but that's where her nightmare began. Instead of the smooth roar of the engine, a long, sharp, deafening alarm sounded. The instrument panel, which normally glowed with futuristic graphics, turned completely red. All the warning lights flashed simultaneously like lights in a broken nightclub, creating an atmosphere of panic in the confined cabin. Before Karen could understand what was happening, the automated voice of the car's computer system echoed loudly through the premium speakers she had bragged so much about. The voice was cold, monotonous, and robotic, but the message was crystal clear. Alert. Unauthorized use of a corporate asset has been detected. The security system has been activated. The engine has been permanently disabled by the administrator. The voice repeated itself over and over. Karen panicked. She repeatedly pressed the start button, stomped on the brake pedal, and even banged the steering wheel with her palms, but the car was completely dead, like an expensive piece of scrap metal. Her face began to pale, and a cold sweat ran down her forehead, ruining her thick makeup. The situation became even more humiliating when the car's security system started honking the horn at regular intervals like a car alarm. The loud sound, echoing throughout the high-ceilinged mall lobby, attracted everyone's attention. Mall security guards, passing shoppers, taxi drivers, and, of course, Karen's friends, who had not yet left. Karen's friends, who were previously admiring, now started whispering and stifling their laughter, seeing Karen like a fish in a bowl, frantically banging on the windows from inside. Karen tried to open the door to escape the embarrassment, but the central locking system, remotely controlled by Mr. Harrison's IT team, had automatically locked her in. She was trapped in her own luxury car, turned into a free spectacle for hundreds of pairs of eyes. At the headquarters of Mr. Harrison's company, a young IT specialist stared at his monitor with an impassive face. He had just executed a priority command from the company's owner. On his screen, the status of the vehicle with that license plate read, "Disabled, unauthorized user." The employee typed the next command. Unlock doors after a 3-minute interval for greater psychological impact and simultaneously send its current location signal to the asset recovery team already on standby in the area. In the mall lobby, those 3 minutes felt like 3 years to Karen. She saw her friends take out their phones, not to help, but to record the ridiculous incident. She screamed for help, but her voice was muffled by the car's soundproof windows. She cried hysterically. Her eye makeup ran, turning into a black liquid that streaked down her cheeks, shattering the image of a society lady she had worked so hard to build. When the door locks finally released automatically, with a loud click, Karen didn't get out immediately. She was too exhausted and in shock. But she had no choice, because in the distance, a bright orange tow truck with a large company logo was already entering the lobby area, making its way through the crowd. The employees who got out of the truck were not typical scruffy operators, but 2 security agents, sturdily built and with determined faces, dressed in black tactical uniforms. They carried a clipboard with the legal documents for asset seizure and walked with a firm stride directly toward Karen's car. It was then that Karen realized this was not a simple engine failure. It was a counterattack, and she was on the front line of the battlefield, with no weapon other than her already shattered pride. The atmosphere in the mall lobby, normally bustling with shoppers, had now transformed into a stage for tension and comedy. The arrival of the massive orange tow truck, its emergency lights silently rotating, parted the crowd like Moses parting the sea. The name of the business conglomerate owned by Emily's father, a name highly respected in the American business world, was clearly inscribed on both sides of the truck. The two burly security agents who emerged from the truck were not just any operators. They wore impeccable black tactical uniforms with the company insignia on their chests and communication earpieces. Their faces were flat, cold, and professional, and there was not a hint of hesitation in their steps as they approached the Mercedes-Benz S-Class, stalled in the middle of the VIP drop-off zone. Karen was still trapped in the car, breathing heavily. The tinted windows prevented her from clearly seeing the expressions of the people outside, but she could feel the hundreds of pairs of eyes fixed on her. Her heart pounded, a mixture of fear and what little pride she had left. One of the security agents knocked firmly on the driver's side window, startling Karen. She tried to yell at them to go away, but her voice didn't penetrate the glass. The agent wasted no time, took out a small electronic device, and held it near the door handle. Immediately, the car lock disengaged with a loud click. The driver's door swung open, letting the warm lobby air and the murmur of the crowd into the cool cabin. The security agent leaned in slightly, but there was no trace of kindness in his tone. "Ma'am, we're going to have to ask you to step out of the vehicle. We need to secure the company asset immediately." Karen, feeling her pride trampled, erupted in anger. She clung to the steering wheel with all her might and refused to move. In a broken voice, she shrieked that the car belonged to her son, Ryan, and that no one had the right to take it. She threatened to call the police and report them for theft. Karen's hysterical screams echoed off the lobby ceiling, and shoppers drew even closer to see who this middle-aged woman causing such a scene was. Several people pulled out their phones, activated the camera function, and began recording the shameful incident in real time. The security agent remained unfazed. He calmly pulled out a plastic folder containing official documents. He displayed the signed and sealed asset recovery order. In a voice loud enough for the front row of the crowd to hear, he explained, "This vehicle is registered as an operational asset of the Harrison Corporation and is currently being misused by an individual without written authorization." The words "company asset" and "misused" rang. In the ears of Karen's friends, who were still standing on the sidewalk, stunned, their expressions changed from confusion to contempt. A rumor began to spread that the luxury car Karen had boasted so much about was actually a company car belonging to her son's father-in-law, not the fruit of her son's success. As Karen continued to resist, the security agents finally took firm action, according to protocol. One agent signaled to his partner. With swift but harmless movements, they pried Karen's hands from the steering wheel. Karen kicked like a spoiled child, her feet flailing in the air, but the strength of a middle-aged woman who barely exercised was no match for two trained guards. In a matter of seconds, Karen was dragged out of the car. She stumbled and would have fallen to the asphalt if she hadn't grabbed onto a lobby pillar to steady herself. Her knockoff handbag fell, its contents spilling onto the floor, a cheap lipstick, crumpled tissues, and a bulky wallet containing only shopping receipts. The next scene was the culmination of the entire humiliation. The tow truck operator quickly hooked the Mercedes front bumper. The towing machinery roared to life and gently lifted the massive car onto the truck's flatbed. Karen ran and pounded on the side of the truck, crying and begging them not to take the car. She screamed Ryan's name, as if her son would suddenly appear to save her, but no hero arrived. The truck drove away slowly, taking with it the symbol of social status Karen had been so proud of. She was left alone in the middle of the driveway. Her once elaborate hairdo was now a mess, and the smeared mascara gave her a ghostly appearance in broad daylight. No one around her helped. They were too busy uploading videos of the incident to social media. One of Karen's friends, a sharp-tongued woman whom Karen had earlier scorned for her old car, approached with a sarcastic smile. She didn't offer a hand to help Karen up, but simply said in a low, cutting voice, "It seems your son's car had a business emergency. Why don't you call an Uber?" The comment elicited snickers from the other friends. Karen looked around with glazed eyes. Her world, built on lies, had crumbled. a bystander's phone pinged with a notification. A video of woman dragged from car by security uploaded to a city gossip account was hitting thousands of views in minutes. The headline was painfully cruel. High society wannabes gift turns out to be in-laws' corporate car. Back at the Harrison mansion, the party atmosphere remained serene, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just occurred at the shopping mall. A soft piano melody played in the background as guests enjoyed dessert. Emily sat silently in her chair, her eyes fixed on the empty plate before her, trying to ignore the sound of her husband chewing greedily beside her. Ryan seemed very relaxed. He would occasionally let out a small burp without covering his mouth, feeling like a little king in his father-in-law's house after having successfully answered Mr. Harrison's question without any argument. He didn't know that the calm in that room was the calm before a great storm. Suddenly, Ryan's phone, lying on the table, vibrated violently with a loud hip-hop ringtone. The sound shattered the room's serenity, and several uncles turned with annoyed expressions. Ryan quickly picked up the phone and saw Mom on the screen. He smiled broadly, thinking his mother was calling to thank him for letting her show off the new car. Confidently, Ryan answered the call without leaving the table, letting everyone hear his conversation. But the smile vanished from Ryan's face in an instant. The voice from the other end was not one of gratitude but a hysterical scream mixed with heartbroken sobs. "Mrs." Anderson's voice was so loud that even Emily, sitting beside him, could faintly hear it. Ryan's face flushed with embarrassment and then paled with anger. He listened to his mother's disjointed account that the car had been forcibly towed by thugs, that she had been humiliated in front of her friends, and that she was now stranded on the street. Ryan's narrow mind immediately concluded that it was all Emily's doing. He thought that Emily, feeling hurt, had secretly called the police or canceled the car's insurance. Rage consumed him. Ryan threw his spoon onto his plate, making a clattering noise, and the entire room fell silent instantly. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. With wild eyes, Ryan pointed at Emily's face, who was still sitting quietly. He screamed at his wife in front of the dozens of relatives present, accusing Emily of being an ungrateful wife who had humiliated his mother. Ryan yelled, "What did you do to have the car taken away?" The veins in Ryan's neck bulged. His face was ready to spew all kinds of insults. Emily lifted her head and looked at her husband with an unreadable expression, a mixture of pity and exhaustion. But before she could open her mouth to defend herself, a baritone voice cut through Ryan's anger like a hot knife through butter. Mr. Harrison had risen from his seat at the head of the table. His movements were slow and deliberate, but he had an aura that left everyone breathless. He didn't shout, didn't slam the table. He simply raised a hand slightly to signal Ryan to be quiet. Surprisingly, Ryan, who was furious, fell silent, his mouth slightly agape. Mr. Harrison walked around the table, his steps firm as he approached his son-in-law. He stopped exactly 2 steps from Ryan and looked him in the eye with a sharp, penetrating gaze, the look of a businessman who had broken many competitors. In a neutral tone, Mr. Harrison said, "There's no problem with the car. It was repossessed because its rightful owner, the company, determined that the current user was not qualified." Ryan opened his mouth, trying to process his father-in-law's words. "Mr. Harrison continued, this time in an even colder tone. "Since I heard your mother needs a car, you should go to her immediately. She's suffering in the heat on the street." Ryan, bewildered, tried to make an excuse, saying he had to get back to the office, but Mr. Harrison interrupted him again. With deadly calm, "Mr. Harrison informed Ryan of a new reality. The keys to the sedan you drove here, please. The company car you've been using for your affairs." Ryan reflexively clutched his pocket, reluctant to hand over the keys. Mr. Harrison gave a slight, terrifying smile. "That car is an employee benefit. And as of 5 p.m. today, your name was removed from the company's employee list for gross ethical violations and misuse of assets. You no longer have the right to that vehicle." The news of his firing was delivered as if Mr. Harrison were discussing the weather. The color drained from Ryan's face, and his legs felt weak. He looked at Emily's uncles and aunts for support, but they all looked at him with cold contempt. No one felt any sympathy for him. Mr. Harrison held out his hand, demanding the keys. With trembling hands, Ryan fumbled in his pocket and handed over the sedan's keys. It was as if he were handing over his own life. Without that car and that job, he was nothing. But the humiliation wasn't over. Mr. Harrison took a bill from his pocket, a $50 bill. He folded it neatly and tucked it into the pocket of Ryan's expensive shirt. Mr. Harrison patted the pocket and then whispered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "This is for your cab fare. A luxury ride is too expensive. You should learn to save money," as you said before about Emily. Mr. Harrison nodded to the head of house security, who was waiting in a corner of the room. 2 sturdy guards approached. They didn't touch Ryan roughly. They simply stood on either side of him, exerting strong psychological pressure for him to leave immediately. Ryan looked at Emily one last time, hoping his wife would defend him, but Emily had already turned away. She was busy pouring her mother a cup of hot tea, acting as if Ryan were no longer there. With faltering steps and his pride shattered, Ryan was escorted from that magnificent dining room, past the delicious food he hadn't finished, and toward the exit. Behind him, the family's conversation slowly resumed, as if a piece of trash that had been an eyesore had just been put in its place. As Ryan walked out the front door of the Harrison mansion, every step was a mix of explosive rage and gut-wrenching shame. The 2 burly security guards who escorted him followed him to the tall, wrought-iron gate. They said nothing, but their gazes screamed that Ryan was now nothing more than trash to be removed from the lavish property immediately. When the automatic gate closed slowly behind him with a heavy, metallic clang, Ryan felt as if the door to his comfortable life had been sealed forever. He stood stunned on the sidewalk outside, looking back at the imposing house, its lights glowing warmly. The place where he should have been enjoying the rest of the evening as a beloved son-in-law, not a fired and banished man. The sky, which had been overcast, finally unleashed its contents. It wasn't a drizzle, but a cold, intense downpour. It was as if nature itself had joined Ryan's humiliation party. He hastily took shelter under a tree by the roadside, but its leaves weren't dense enough to protect him from the onslaught of water. The expensive silk shirt, bought with Emily's supplementary credit card, was now soaked and clinging to his skin. Desperately, he searched his pockets and pulled out his smartphone, its screen slightly wet from the rain. With trembling fingers, he opened the ride-sharing app. He had to get out of there quickly before a neighbor or an acquaintance of his father-in-law saw him stranded on the street like a beggar. But a new problem arose. The exclusive gated community where Mr. Harrison lived had very strict security rules. The app on Ryan's phone showed a notification that no driver could enter the private residential area to pick him up without an access permit from a homeowner. Ryan tried calling the security booth at the entrance, hoping they would open the barrier for a cab, but his call was rejected. His number had clearly been blocked or flagged to be ignored. He was left with no other choice. Ryan had to walk to the main entrance of the community, nearly 2 miles from where he stood. A distance he would normally cover in minutes in an air-conditioned car now stretched before him like a path of torture. Ryan began to walk with heavy steps, his shiny leather shoes stepping in dirty puddles on the asphalt. Each step was a blow to his ego. The rain intensified, and a strong wind made the trees sway violently. In less than 5 minutes, Ryan was completely drenched. His hair, once styled with gel, now fell limp over his forehead. Rain streamed down his face, hiding the tears of rage that began to well up. He cursed Emily, in his mind. He cursed Mr. Harrison. He felt treated unfairly. In his twisted logic, as a son-in-law, he had the right to enjoy those comforts. His father-in-law's anger was excessive over a simple car. He didn't realize the real problem was his own audacity, accumulated over years. As Ryan staggered through the storm, a pair of very bright headlights illuminated his back. He moved to the side of the road, hoping it was just a passing neighbor, but the car slowed as it approached him. It was a large, pearl-white SUV, the same model that had been confiscated from his mother that afternoon, but this one was brand new. The license plate was still a temporary one. Ryan turned, hoping for a bit of compassion. Maybe Mr. Harrison had changed his mind and sent his chauffeur to give him a ride to the entrance. The car's windows were immaculate, treated with the best water-repellent coating, so Ryan could see clearly who was inside. At the wheel was Mr. Harrison. The middle-aged man was driving casually with one hand on the wheel. His face was serene and dry, and he was enjoying classical music that could be faintly heard from outside. Beside him sat Emily. His wife had changed into warmer clothes. She was holding a thermos with a hot drink. Her face looked peaceful. Time seemed to slow down as the car passed slowly by Ryan. He stared at his wife's face, hoping she would turn, see her husband shivering in the cold, and ask her father to stop. But that hope was shattered. Emily looked straight ahead. Her gaze was empty, as if Ryan were an unimportant object on the road, like a lamppost or a trash can. There was no hatred in Emily's eyes, only absolute indifference. The car accelerated again. Its tires went through a fairly deep puddle, splashing brown mud onto Ryan's already soaked pants. Ryan stood there, drenched in mud and rainwater, watching in disbelief as the taillights of that luxury car disappeared around the corner toward the exit gate. He was left alone, feeling a cold that chilled him to the bone. An hour later, Ryan finally arrived at the rented apartment he had called home, though both the rent and the bills were paid by Emily. His body was shaking violently, and his lips were blue. He slammed the door open, hoping to find some warmth or at least a place to vent his emotions, but the scene that greeted him in the living room only gave him a worse headache. The place was a mess. Curled up on the living room sofa was Mrs. Anderson. Her hair was disheveled, and the marks of smeared mascara still stained her cheeks. His mother was also drenched. Apparently, she had had trouble getting decent transportation from the mall. Upon seeing Ryan arrive home in an equally pitiful state, Mrs. Anderson, instead of asking how he was or bringing him a towel, immediately stood up and unleashed her fury. She pointed at Ryan's face and screamed, asking where his responsibility as a son was. Mrs. Anderson recounted the tragedy at the mall again, exaggerating how she had been treated like a criminal and made the laughingstock of the whole city. She blamed Ryan for not controlling his wife, accusing him of being too soft on Emily, which had given the daughter-in-law the courage to commit the disrespectful act of repossessing the company car. Mrs. Anderson's sharp screams filled the small apartment, making Ryan's ears ring. Physically and mentally exhausted, Ryan couldn't take it anymore. For the first time in his life, he yelled back at his mother. He threw his briefcase on the floor and shouted that this had all happened because of his mother's greed and her desire to show off. Ryan said that because his mother couldn't keep her mouth shut about the car's ownership, he had been fired, kicked out, and humiliated in front of Mr. Harrison's entire family. Mrs. Anderson fell silent for a moment upon hearing the word fired, her eyes wide. But the woman's ego was too big to admit a mistake. Instead, she turned the tables. She said the firing wouldn't have been a problem if Ryan were truly as successful and rich as he had always claimed. The fight between mother and son raged on, blaming each other and airing the dirty laundry they had kept hidden under the mask of a harmonious and prosperous family. The argument only stopped when their stomachs rumbled loudly in unison. Hunger overcame emotion. They realized they hadn't eaten anything since noon. The luxurious food from Mr. Harrison's party was a distant memory, and Mrs. Anderson, too busy showing off, hadn't had lunch at the mall either. The hunger, combined with the stress and exhaustion of being soaked by the rain, felt painful. Ryan let out a long sigh, trying to swallow his pride. He sat on the sofa, still damp from his clothes, and took out his phone again. He planned to order a lot of expensive fast food to relieve the stress. He thought a delicious meal could at least offer some comfort on this terrible day. Ryan opened a food delivery app. His fingers quickly selected the family meal from his favorite fried chicken restaurant. He added several side dishes and a large drink. The total bill came to nearly $30. Without hesitation, he pressed the order button and selected the credit card payment method saved in the app. The loading circle spun on the phone's screen. Ryan swallowed, imagining the hot, crispy fried chicken. But instead of an order confirmation, a red error message appeared on the screen. Transaction failed. Payment declined by card issuer. Ryan frowned. He thought it might be a network error. He tried again, this time using his second credit card, the platinum card he always bragged about to his friends. The result was the same. declined. A cold sweat began to form on his temples, mixing with the rainwater that hadn't yet dried. He tried every card he had on file debit, store card, digital wallet. One by one, they all rejected the transaction. It was then that reality hit him hard. He had just remembered that all those cards were supplementary cards, linked to Emily's main account. All this time, Emily had funded his lifestyle, and Ryan had simply been swiping the card. Ryan's fingers trembled violently. He opened his mobile banking app to check the balance of his personal account, the account for his salary from his job at Mr. Harrison's company. The number on the screen left him helpless, $150. That was all the money he had earned for himself. He had already spent the rest last month on appliance installments for his mother, and that account would probably be frozen soon, since he had been fired. Ryan looked at Mrs. Anderson with a pale face. He stammered that he couldn't use any of the cards, that Emily had blocked everything. Mrs. Anderson screamed in frustration and threw a sofa cushion at Ryan, lamenting her fate of having to go hungry in her own home. As if that suffering weren't enough, a sharp, continuous beep suddenly sounded from the electric meter outside the apartment. It was the warning sound that the prepaid electricity balance was critically low. Ryan and Mrs. Anderson looked at each other with fear in their eyes. All this time, the meter had always been automatically topped up by Mr. Harrison's personal assistant, who managed his children's logistical needs. Now, there were no such facilities. That beeping sounded like the countdown on a time bomb. Ryan searched his pocket for the cash Mr. Harrison had given him earlier. The $50 bill was soaked and wrinkled. Before he could even think of running to the corner store to buy a top-up card, there was a loud clack. Instantly, all the lights in the house went out. The fan stopped, and the TV screen went black. Total darkness enveloped them. The rental apartment was plunged into complete darkness, illuminated only by the occasional flashes of lightning through the window. In that darkness, the sobs of Mrs. Anderson could be heard, who had begun to cry like a frightened child. Ryan lay back on the sofa in the dark, his stomach aching with hunger, his body trembling with cold, and his wallet empty. That night, for the first time in his pampered life, Ryan felt what true poverty was: no food, no light, and no way out. The next morning, the sun shone brightly, in stark contrast to the gloomy atmosphere in Ryan's rental apartment, which was still plunged into darkness from the lack of electricity. With the fan and air conditioning off all night, Ryan woke up with his body sticky with sweat. He opened his eyes to a throbbing headache. The remnants of the previous night's stress and hunger still plagued his body. There was no breakfast prepared on the table, no aroma of coffee that the service staff used to make. And worst of all, the water pump also depended on the cut-off electricity, so no clean water came from the bathroom tap. Forced by circumstances, Ryan washed himself with the murky water left in the bathtub and put on the work shirt that had been soaked the day before. The now dry shirt was wrinkled and smelled of damp, and the mud stains on his pants were barely concealed, despite being rubbed with a damp cloth. He looked at his disheveled reflection, in a broken mirror, in a corner red eyes from lack of sleep and a neglected, stubbly beard. However, his enormous ego still pushed him to go to the office. In his mind, which was still in denial, he thought yesterday's firing was just an emotional threat from Mr. Harrison. He was convinced that if he went and apologized, or at least showed a dedicated work attitude, his father-in-law would soften. The commute to work, which he normally made comfortably in an air-conditioned sedan, became a form of torture. Ryan had to walk to the main road and squeeze into a crowded city bus, filled with the smell of sweat from thousands of other passengers. He stood, squeezed near the door, trying to avoid having his shoes stepped on and holding back the nausea caused by his empty stomach. Upon arriving in the downtown financial district, Ryan walked with a forced straightness toward the skyscraper owned by Mr. Harrison. He adjusted his shirt collar, trying to regain the dignity he had already lost. But the looks from some of his former colleagues he passed on the sidewalk were different. They didn't greet him, but looked away or gave him scornful glances while whispering. Apparently, the rumors about what happened at the party and the viral video of his mother had spread faster than his footsteps. Ryan entered the building's majestic lobby with its gleaming marble floor. He headed for the automatic turnstiles and took out the employee ID card hanging from his neck. With a motion that had become muscle memory over the past 3 years, he swiped the card over the scanner. Normally, the light would turn green and the turnstiles would open, but this time the machine emitted a long, sharp buzz and the light turned bright red. The words, "Access denied," appeared clearly on the small screen. Ryan, feeling shame rise in his throat, swiped the card again once, twice, 3 times. The line of employees behind him began to murmur impatiently. That rejection sound was like a siren announcing his status as an outcast. Before Ryan could bang the machine in frustration, 2 burly building security guards were already in front of him. One of them was the head of security whom Ryan used to order to buy him cigarettes or carry his mother's shopping bags. But today, that guard's gaze was cold and distant, as if he were looking at a suspicious stranger. The guard did not greet him. In a firm, neutral voice, he informed Ryan that he could not enter the office area. The order came directly from the board of directors, and Ryan's name was already on the building's security blacklist. Ryan tried to argue, shouting that he wanted to see the HR director to clear up the misunderstanding, but the guard shook his head firmly. The security guard bent down slightly and picked up a cardboard box from under the reception desk. He pushed the box abruptly into Ryan's chest. Inside the box were his personal belongings removed from his desk. A photo frame of him and Emily with the glass broken, a coffee mug that said, "The Boss," a stapler, and a couple of cheap pens. On top of this pile of junk was a sealed white envelope with the official company logo. It was his termination letter. With trembling hands, Ryan opened the envelope. His eyes scanned the harsh but deadly legal terms. The reason for termination was written in bold: gross violation of the Code of Ethics, misuse of company assets, and conduct detrimental to the corporate image. There was no severance pay, no letter of recommendation, only a notification that he would face criminal charges if he failed to return all company inventory. Ryan stood stunned in the middle of the busy lobby, clutching the box like an automaton. He felt naked in front of the hundreds of people passing by. Shame burned from his face to his ears. He turned and stumbled out of the building, away from the place that had once given him identity and pride. He sat on a nearby park bench and took out his phone. He didn't want to give up. He was sure that with his 3 years of experience at a large company, he could easily get a job elsewhere, even at one of Mr. Harrison's competitors. With the little internet data he had left, he started calling some acquaintances at rival firms. The first call was to a marketing director at another real estate company who had tried to recruit him in the past. Ryan tried to sound cheerful, greeted him warmly, and asked about his family before expressing his interest in seeking new challenges. But the voice on the other end sounded uncomfortable and hurried. The person interrupted Ryan and bluntly said he had already heard what happened. He explained that the business world was very small and rumors of asset misuse were poison to anyone's reputation. No reputable company would dare hire someone who had been personally fired by Mr. Harrison and had a history of questionable integrity. The person said he was sorry and hung up quickly. Ryan called his 2nd, 3rd, and 10th contacts. The result was the same. Some didn't answer. Others blocked his number immediately. And some bluntly told him his name was already on the blacklist of the industry's HR Directors Association. Mr. Harrison had truly closed every door on him. Ryan had not only lost his job, he had lost his future. Under the cruel city sun, Ryan realized he was now an unemployed man with a toxic reputation, unemployable anywhere. A week had passed since the expulsion, and Ryan's life had sunk into an even deeper pit of hardship. He and his mother survived in their dark rental apartment by selling off their remaining appliances one by one, from the TV to the blender to a neighborhood junk dealer, for a pittance. The money was barely enough for 1 sandwich a day and some candles for light. In the midst of this desperation, a court officer showed up with a summons. Emily had officially filed for divorce. Ryan read the lawsuit documents with cunning eyes. His manipulative mind didn't see this as the end, but as a golden opportunity. He thought about the division of assets. During their 3 years of marriage, Emily's wealth and the gifts from Mr. Harrison had been substantial. In Ryan's logic, As her legal husband, he was entitled to half of that fortune. Mrs. Anderson, who was chewing on a cold sandwich in a corner, perked up at the mention of the asset lawsuit. She whispered venom into her son's ear, urging him to demand a share of the luxurious house they lived in, the cars, and the company stocks. Mrs. Anderson convinced Ryan that the law would surely side with the husband and that Emily wouldn't be cruel enough to leave her ex-husband with nothing. With the last of their money, Ryan hired a cheap lawyer with an office in a strip mall on the outskirts of the city, a lawyer who boasted more than he won cases. But Ryan had no other choice. He went to court with the vain confidence that he would walk out a new millionaire. The day of the hearing arrived. The atmosphere in the family court was formal and cold. Ryan wore the best shirt he had left, which was a bit loose due to his drastic weight loss over the past week, but he tried his best to look pitiable to gain the judge's sympathy. However, his eyes gleamed with greed. On the other side of the courtroom, a door opened, and Emily walked in. Her appearance was truly different. She was radiant, dressed in an elegant navy blue dress and a carefully knotted silk scarf. Her face was clear, serene, and exuded an aura of determination that Ryan had never seen before. Emily did not come alone. She was accompanied by the country's top family law firm men in expensive suits carrying leather briefcases full of documents. The hearing began with the reading of the complaint and the response. When it was time to discuss marital assets, Ryan's lawyer immediately attacked with an exorbitant demand. He demanded the division of assets worth several $1,000,000, claiming Ryan had contributed to managing the family business and maintaining the stability of the home. Ryan even shed crocodile tears, saying he had been inhumanely kicked out without a penny. He demanded compensation for material and moral damages. Mrs. Anderson, sitting in the audience, nodded in agreement, her eyes shining as she imagined the money they would receive. But the victorious smiles on Ryan and his mother's faces didn't last long. Emily's lead attorney, a middle-aged man with thick glasses and a gaze as sharp as an eagle's, stood up silently. He didn't refute Ryan's claims with emotional words, but with data. He requested the court's permission to present evidence from a forensic audit of the household finances during the 3 years of marriage. The lawyer opened a large box containing a stack of bank statements, credit card bills, and transfer receipts as thick as a brick. He began to present shocking facts. It turned out that during the marriage, Ryan had not contributed a single penny to household expenses. His meager salary was always spent entirely on his personal expenses and Mrs. Anderson's lifestyle. Worse, Emily's lawyer proved that all the luxurious facilities Ryan and his mother enjoyed, overseas trips, Mrs. Anderson's designer handbags, jewelry, and even the renovation of her mother's house in her hometown were paid for with the supplementary credit card in Emily's name. Legally, the use of funds without written permission and outside the couple's reasonable living expenses was classified as a debt. The lawyer presented a summary indicating that the total hedonistic expenses of Ryan and his mother amounted to the fantastic sum of over $300,000. The courtroom fell silent. The figure was so large that the judge frowned and looked at Ryan with inquisitive eyes. Ryan turned pale. He tried to argue that they were gifts from his wife, but Emily finally spoke. In a soft but firm voice, she stated under oath that she had never authorized the use of such a large sum for her mother-in-law's luxuries. She said that, on the contrary, she often had to save to finance her business. Emily revealed she had remained silent all this time because she wanted to save her marriage, but since Ryan had initiated the demand for asset division, she had the right to recover her money. Emily's lawyer filed a counterclaim. He demanded that Ryan return all the money or that the assets purchased with that money be seized as compensation for damages. The judge's gavel fell with a thunderous sound that felt like a death sentence for Ryan's future. The court, after examining the irrefutable evidence, decided to grant Emily's divorce petition and dismiss all of Ryan's claims for asset division. Furthermore, the judge ruled that Ryan's obligation to repay the illegally used funds had been proven. As collateral, the judge ordered the seizure of any assets in the defendant's or his family's name that were proven to have been purchased with that flow of funds. This meant that the deed to Mrs. Anderson's only house in her hometown, whose mortgage had recently been paid off with money from Emily's credit card, would be seized by the state for auction. Upon hearing the verdict, Mrs. Anderson screamed hysterically in the courtroom. Her body convulsed, and her eyes bulged as if she couldn't believe her own greed had become a boomerang that destroyed the last assets she owned. She fainted on the courtroom floor, causing a commotion. Ryan sat motionless in his chair, his body limp as if his bones had been removed. He looked at Emily, hoping to see some compassion in the eyes of the woman who once loved him. But Emily had already stood up, adjusted her clothes, and walked out of the courtroom without a single backward glance. Behind her, medical staff entered to attend to Mrs. Anderson. Meanwhile, Ryan realized he had just dug his own grave. He had come to get rich, but he was leaving as a destitute man with a debt of hundreds of thousands of dollars. After the judge's gavel fell in family court, the lives of Ryan and Mrs. Anderson took a 180-degree turn. The asset seizure was much quicker and crueler than they had imagined. The only house in her hometown, which she had always boasted of as a symbol of her son's success, now had a conspicuous red sign that read, "Seized by the state." Without a place to return to, no assets to mortgage, and no money in the bank to rent a decent place, they were left on the streets. They were forcibly evicted from their previous rental apartment for not paying rent for 2 consecutive months, and were now stranded in a rundown, overcrowded neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Their new residence was at the end of a narrow, damp alley where sunlight barely reached, blocked by the touching rooftops. The walls of the shack were exposed brick, unplastered. The asbestos roof leaked everywhere, creating damp spots on the ceiling, and the air inside was suffocating, mixed with the smell of stagnant sewage just outside the rotten wooden door. In that cramped space, luxury was a forgotten word. There was no soft spring mattress to comfort their backs, no air conditioning to cool their skin. Only a thin mat on the cold concrete floor served as a bed for both of them. Every night, they had to sleep hungry, accompanied by the buzzing of fierce mosquitoes and the loud sound of rats scurrying across the ceiling. Mrs. Anderson, who once always looked splendid thanks to $1,000 facials and designer clothes, now looked like a completely different person. Her face was dull and greasy, and the stress lines and malnutrition had begun to appear deep and prominent. Her hair, always carefully styled in expensive salons, now often fell limp and smelled of damp, tied back carelessly with a rubber band from a food package. There were no more high society friends to praise her, only neighbors who looked at her with suspicion. Every day, Mrs. Anderson had to wake up before dawn, not for her usual morning exercise or to prepare for a country club meeting, but because she had started working as a laundress and ironer for her neighbors, most of whom were factory workers. To avoid starvation, this former socialite had to stoop to doing the hard labor she once deeply despised. Her hands, once soft and only holding porcelain teacups, were now rough, calloused, and cracked from exposure to the cheap detergent that burned her skin. She often cried alone in public restrooms while scrubbing stains from other people's clothes, lamenting her fate of having to become a servant to people she once considered of low economic status. But her neighbors showed her no compassion. On the contrary, they often mocked and scolded her for her slow and sloppy work and for constantly complaining about the quality of the laundry soap. Ryan's situation was not much better. In fact, it could be said that he suffered a more severe mental breakdown than his mother. The university degree from a prestigious university, which he once proudly mentioned every time he applied for a job, was now worth less than the paper used to wrap fried food. The stigma of being a dishonest employee, an embezzler of assets, and a person dishonorably discharged from Mr. Harrison's large company caused him to be instantly rejected by all companies. Even small businesses that needed administrative staff were reluctant to hire someone with such a poor integrity record. The corporate world had firmly shut its doors on him. Finally, to eat, Ryan had to swallow the enormous pride he once had. He took odd jobs as a porter at the city's central wholesale market. Every night until dawn, Ryan had to carry 100-pound sacks of rice, vegetables, and onions from delivery trucks to the merchants' stalls. His back, once comfortably supported by an ergonomic chair in an air-conditioned office, was now scratched, bruised, and hunched from bearing the heavy loads that tortured his spine. His skin, once carefully cared for, was now sunburned, black, greasy, and filled with a grime that was hard to remove, even with soap. His feet, once encased in shiny leather shoes, now only wore thin, patched sandals and walked on the wet market floor, littered with rotten garbage. Ryan often had to fight with other stronger porters for a loading job and was often pushed and fell into the mud, becoming the laughingstock of the market people who didn't know he was once an arrogant young manager. Whenever Ryan returned to the shack with his broken body and barely enough change to buy a couple of sandwiches, the atmosphere at home, far from offering him rest, greeted him with a new hell. Fights between mother and son became an inevitable routine. Mrs. Anderson, unable to accept her difficult life, continued to blame Ryan for all their suffering. In a shrill voice, she cursed Ryan for being a useless and stupid son who had not known how to take care of his rich and good wife, Emily. She kept bringing up the past, saying that if Ryan had been smarter in winning Mr. Harrison's favor and had not been so honest about the car, they would not have ended up in this dump. Ryan, physically and mentally exhausted, no longer accepted the reproaches as he did when he was an obedient son. His respect for his mother had been completely eroded by the bitter reality. He responded to his mother's insults with much crueler and more hurtful words. He shouted in her face that all of this was the karma of Mrs. Anderson's arrogant mouth and ostentatious lifestyle, wanting to look rich with a stolen Mercedes. Ryan blamed his mother's greed for pushing him to commit small corruptions and lies that ultimately caused him to lose his job, his wife, and his future. Their hateful screams often ended with the breaking of plastic plates or slamming doors, causing the next-door neighbors to bang on the wall and threaten to kick them out if they continued to make noise in the middle of the night. In that narrow, hot, and suffocating space, the affection between mother and son had disappeared without a trace, replaced by mutual hatred, blame, and a deep regret that was too late to fix. They were trapped together in the pit of poverty they had dug for themselves, with no hope of ever getting out. A year had passed since the storm of ruin struck Ryan and his mother, erasing all traces of the false luxury they once enjoyed. Time moved on, indifferent to their miserable fate. On the other hand, for those who were patient and honest, time brought sweet rewards. That afternoon, in a fine dining restaurant located in the city's most exclusive business district, the atmosphere was cool, quiet, and elegant. The restaurant was known as a meeting place for successful entrepreneurs and high society. The marble floor gleamed, reflecting the light from crystal chandeliers, and the aroma of premium steaks and gourmet coffee filled the air, perfectly cooled by a central air conditioning system. Soft instrumental jazz played in the background, adding a touch of class to the place. At one of the best tables, situated next to a large window overlooking the main street, sat Emily and her father, Chairman James Harrison. Emily's appearance was much more charming and dignified than a year ago. She was elegantly dressed in a modern designer dress that perfectly matched a soft-patterned silk scarf. Her face was clear and naturally radiant, emanating an unmistakable inner peace and happiness. There was no longer any trace of sadness, mental pressure, or swollen eyes, unlike when she was Ryan's oppressed wife. Emily was now a complete, independent, and respected woman. Today was a special day of celebration. Emily had just opened the 5th branch of her fashion boutique, which had become a trendsetter among young women. The business, which she had started anew with her own capital and her father's strategic guidance, had grown very rapidly in a short time. She had proven to the world, and especially to herself, that she could stand firm on her own 2 feet without the shadow of her father's great name. Mr. Harrison looked at his daughter with overflowing pride and affection. The elderly gentleman looked healthy. His smile was wide and free as he listened to Emily talk enthusiastically about her business expansion plans to enter the export market of neighboring countries. They laughed together, enjoying a chocolate cake dessert, celebrating a true victory in life. For Mr. Harrison, seeing his daughter free herself from a harmful parasite and become a strong woman was an immeasurable happiness, far more valuable than any luxury car he had ever bought. In the midst of their warm and laughing conversation, Emily's gaze casually drifted to the huge window beside them. The thick, soundproof glass perfectly separated two opposing worlds, the quiet, fragrant, and luxurious world inside the restaurant, and the noisy, hot, dusty, and cruel world outside. On the sidewalk of the avenue in front of the restaurant, there was a major traffic jam due to the lunch hour. Emily saw a small altercation in an illegal parking area not far from the restaurant's lobby entrance. An informal parking attendant, wearing a torn and greasy old orange vest, was being harshly berated by the owner of a luxury sedan who claimed his car had been scraped by a passing motorcycle. The parking attendant was bowing his head deeply, apologizing with a very miserable and frightened gesture. He clasped his hands in front of his chest several times, begging not to be hit or reported. The attendant's skin was dark, burned by the scorching sun. His hair was messy and long, full of street dust, and his body was very thin, like someone suffering from chronic malnutrition. His cheekbones protruded sharply, and his eyes were sunken, surrounded by dark circles. Emily squinted, trying to recognize a familiar figure behind that ragged appearance. The next moment, Emily was startled. It was Ryan, her ex-husband, who once always looked impeccable in ironed shirts, elegant suits, and expensive watches. Now he was standing on the hot asphalt without decent shoes, receiving insults and spit from another person over a $2 coin. Emily's heart fluttered. But the flutter was not due to residual love or emerging nostalgia, but to a strange compassion like one feels seeing a suffering stranger. Emily's gaze shifted to the sidewalk opposite where Ryan stood. There, an old woman in old clothes and faded pajamas was sitting on her knees, selling small packets of tissues and face masks to passers-by with a pitiful face. Her face was covered in street dust and sweat. Her wrinkles had become deeper, but Emily could still very clearly recognize the features of Mrs. Anderson. The woman who once proudly boasted about her knockoff handbags in shopping malls and who insulted Emily at every country club meeting, calling her barren and stupid, now had to hold out her hand on the street, hoping for people's compassion to buy a tissue for $1. The scene was too contrasting with the last memory Emily had of them. It was as if an invisible thread, or perhaps fate, wanted to show her the end of the play. Ryan, having just been berated by the car owner, turned his head toward the luxury restaurant building. Perhaps he wanted to escape the scorching sun for a moment, or perhaps he just wanted to see the comfortable life he could no longer enjoy. His eyes passed through the transparent glass and met directly with Emily's, who was watching him. For Ryan, time seemed to stop. He stood frozen on the spot, his feet seemingly nailed to the hot asphalt. He saw his ex-wife sitting there inside, so beautiful, clean, radiant, and happy. He saw Emily surrounded by the luxury he once felt and wasted. He saw that the delicious food on Emily's table probably cost as much as his 3-month income from carrying sacks and parking cars. Shame, extreme regret, and the collapse of his ego hit Ryan's chest so hard that he gasped for breath and felt nauseous. He saw clearly what he had thrown away to follow the irrational pride and greed of his mother. He wanted to scream. He wanted to call out to Emily, wanted to run inside, kneel, and beg to be allowed to go back to the past. But he realized that the thick glass was a wall of fate he could no longer cross. He was just dust on the outside, while Emily was a diamond in the showcase. Ryan saw that Mrs. Anderson had also turned and was covering her mouth in shock. Tears of regret streamed down her dirty, wrinkled cheeks. Emily held Ryan's tear-filled gaze for a few long seconds. On Emily's face, there was no anger, no smile of satisfied mockery, no burning revenge. There was only a serene, expressionless look, the look of someone seeing a past that has ended and that no longer has the slightest place in her life. Emily slowly averted her gaze, unilaterally breaking that eye contact. She turned back to her father. Mr. Harrison had also noticed Ryan's presence outside but chose to ignore it. Mr. Harrison simply nodded and smiled at his daughter, a silent signal that everything had passed. Emily returned her father's smile gently and then, with an elegant and decisive gesture, called the waiter. When the waiter approached, Emily asked him to close the window blinds, as the sunlight was too glaring. The waiter nodded politely and slowly pulled the cord. The thick, golden fabric descended inch by inch, slowly hiding the view of the street, blocking Ryan's view of Emily, and separating the bright light inside the restaurant from the painful heat outside. The curtain closed firmly, and for Emily, the book of her past was also closed forever. Meanwhile, for Ryan and his mother, life in regret was a prison without bars that they would have to endure until the day they died. 5 years is not a short time for the wheel of fate to make a full turn. In a modest coffee shop on the edge of the wholesale market, Ryan sat lost in thought with an empty gaze. His appearance was now much older than his actual age. His once thick black hair was now graying and thin in some areas. The skin on his face was leathery from the sun, and his teeth were yellowed from smoking too much to relieve stress. He wore a faded political campaign t-shirt and worn-out shorts. In front of him was a cup of watery black coffee and a cold donut, the only breakfast he could afford before returning to his job of loading vegetables. The noise of the market and the shouts of the merchants sounded like the background music to his gloomy life. Ryan's attention was drawn when the coffee shop owner turned up the volume on an old tube television placed on a dusty shelf. The morning news was broadcasting a special report on the profile of an inspiring female entrepreneur who had succeeded in the global market. Ryan's heart seemed to stop when he saw the face that appeared on the screen. It was Emily. But the Emily he saw on TV was very different from the one he knew. She was so elegant, dignified, and radiant, with an aura of true happiness. Emily was being interviewed in the courtyard of a luxurious house, much larger than Mr. Harrison's old home, surrounded by a beautiful flower garden. The camera focused on the figure next to Emily, a handsome man with a kind smile and a tender gaze, holding an adorable little boy in his arms. It was Emily's new husband, a renowned architect known for being a religious and very family-oriented person. In the interview, Emily, with sparkling eyes, said that her success was due to the prayers and support of her current husband, who always treated her like a queen and never asked for anything more than their happiness together. Emily also mentioned that, as a devotion from her dark past, she had just established a social foundation to help women suffering from family abandonment. In that success story, Ryan's name was never mentioned. For Emily, Ryan had been completely erased from the story. He was nothing more than a small stone that made her stumble before she could finally run at full speed. Ryan felt an immense pressure in his chest, as if a large rock were crushing his lungs. He saw how perfect Emily's life was. He now saw the true love in her new husband's eyes, something Ryan never gave her, too busy chasing his mother's pride. Regret hit him like a great wave hitting a rock, but this time the wave drowned him. Ryan remembered Mrs. Anderson, who had been bedridden for a year, paralyzed in their cramped rental apartment after suffering a minor stroke. His once arrogant mother now only cried and raved in her dreams, spending her old age in an adult diaper that was rarely changed due to lack of money and without any of her high society friends coming to visit. With trembling hands, Ryan left a few coins on the coffee shop table and stood up, leaving behind the television broadcast that still showed the happy laughter of Emily's small family. He went out into the damp bustle of the market and once again loaded a heavy sack of onions onto his shoulders. A light drizzle began to fall, hiding the tears that finally rolled down Ryan's cheeks. He realized that the harshest punishment was not poverty, but the awareness that he once held a diamond in his hands but threw it away for a stone he thought was gold. Now, he had to spend the rest of his life watching someone else's happiness from afar while he spun in the labyrinth of endless regret. His story ended with a justice perfectly written by fate.